What if your biggest frustration with accuracy could actually be solved with just one adjustment? With 25 years of experience and thousands of portraits under my belt, I've watched this single shift transform my students' drawings. So let me show you what this is, why it works so fast, and how you can use it to master proportions and realistic portraits. As a teenager, I would own posters like this, of like Jimi Hendrix, and I would stare at them and I would notice that they would all have these real obvious shapes to them, and I would think, how have they managed to put these shapes together but it still looks like a real person? There's no transition in shading, but it still has that lifelike look to it. The reason why is because even though there's no transitions going from shade to shade, your brain still fills in the gaps because the shades of the shapes are still accurate. Now, one of the main reasons why portraits are so difficult is because of the nuances in the tonal shades. When a tone starts, when it stops, when it fades into another tone. I hear it all the time. My shading just isn't good enough, or my blending isn't good enough. But here's the thing, if you get the shapes of tones correct, the blending matters a lot less. That's why portraits with stronger facial shapes are easier. They have more obvious tonal blocks. Softer faces are usually harder because the transitions are less clear. Watch what happens when we exaggerate the tonal shapes in this portrait. Notice how the transitions become more obvious. Now let's just push it a little bit further. You notice how much easier it is now to spot where one shade ends and another one begins? But here's the real question. Why does it make such a difference? What if I told you that details are actually the least important part of making a portrait look realistic? Let me show you. Here's how I order my priority list for realism. You have tonal shades, you have the structure, and then you have the details. If we compare a portrait with perfect structure, but it has pretty weak tonal shading, next to a portrait with not the best structure, but with better tonal shading, with absolutely zero details, the portrait with the better tonal shading will win every single time because it holds more value. Now I did this drawing many years ago. It was for a school project. For some reason, I drew Britney Spears. Please don't judge me. The point is, as you can see, it has perfect structure. That's only because I used the grid method, but it has pretty weak tonal shading. I have like these black areas here, which kind of save it a bit, but this, it took me about 10 to 12 hours. Now this drawing here, I did fairly recently, completely by freehand, just sat on my sofa, piece of paper, piece of charcoal, and it took me about 30 minutes. No grids, no fuss, just focusing on the bold value shapes. That's it. Now, can you see the difference? The quick sketch feels way more alive, even though it's much less perfect. Yes, the other one has perfect structure, but that's only because I used the grid method and about 10 hours to complete it. Imagine if I would have spent even just another 30 minutes on the quick sketch. Look how much more of an impact the sketch has. Think of it like baking a cake, right? The icing is the equivalent to the details of the portrait, and the actual cake itself is the value and the structure of the portrait. Now the icing, which is the details, it might look fancy, but if you start adding the icing before actually having a cake that you can put it on, then you don't really have cake. It's just a plate of nothing really. Now it's exactly the same with drawing. If you work on the details too soon without the actual value and structure, the drawing will just look flat, just like the cake. So how do you actually know where a prominent tonal shape starts and when it stops? What if you put it in the wrong place? Does that ruin the portrait? Well, here's the surprising thing, right? There isn't just one right way of doing this. In fact, if you and I mapped out the prominent tonal shapes of the same portrait, they would look different. And you know what? That's absolutely fine. As long as the value shapes are still accurate, it doesn't matter. It's like the difference between a cappuccino and a latte. As long as you actually have the main ingredients, it doesn't really matter how you adapt them. To prove this, let me show you. The drawing on the left I did about a couple of years ago, and the drawing on the right was fairly recently. As you can see, two different styles, two different feelings, but it's of the same person. Now let me show you their prominent value shapes. As you can see, the tonal shapes are different, but they still work because they're still accurate. It's not the bells and whistles that make a portrait stand out. I mean, it kind of is to a certain extent, but the details will literally do absolutely nothing if those tonal shapes aren't there. And this is the superpower of tones. And again, this is why I hold tones so high up and is the most important factor, even over structure. So what does this mean for you? How do you approach your next drawing so your portrait pops off the page with the life and soul that you want? Here's the secret. Instead of hunching over your paper and cramming in every single tiny detail, start by mapping out your prominent tonal shapes using just straight lines. This keeps everything simple and manageable right from the beginning. And you might be thinking, well, why specifically straight lines? If you jump into the drawing with curved lines, you're actually making things a lot more harder for yourselves. Drawing curved lines adds unnecessary complexity and confusion to the portrait. Think of it like this, right? Imagine there's two city maps. One just has straight roads, easy to follow, easy to find your way around. The other one is full of roads winding around everywhere. The map with the clear straight roads is much more approachable. It's exactly the same with portraits. If you map out your key tonal shapes with straight lines, suddenly the drawing feels much more doable. Now here's why this works. When you simplify those shapes, you're building what is called form. Form is what makes a flat piece of paper look like it holds a real three-dimensional person. It's the illusion of depth created by light, shadow, and tone. Even if your shapes are blocky, your brain fills in the gaps. Just like how a pixelated photo close up looks like a bit of a mess, doesn't really make sense. But when you step back, it all makes sense. That's why for me, details are always at the bottom of the priority list. And I know some of you are thinking, but I love details. I want my drawings to be as detailed as possible. And great, absolutely, 100%, and you definitely can, but there's a time and a place for it. How many times have you spent hunched over your paper, pouring hours in trying to get the details right, only to step back and then have that gut punch feeling because it feels like there's something missing? That's because the details are the shiny objects of the portrait. They grab your attention, but they don't give your portrait its life. It's the prominent tonal shapes that create depth and make your drawing feel real. If you jump into the details too soon, three things almost always will happen. Your proportions start to warp because you're constantly shifting things around. Your portrait ends up looking washed out and too light. And you spend 5 times as long fussing over the wrong things and end up feeling stuck. So how do you break out of this trap? Let me show you what you can do to make things a bit more manageable. What you can do is what I've done in this video. You can make digital examples of the portraits. Honestly, they're super simple to do. If you have an iPad or a laptop, that's all you need. There's also loads of software out there that you can use for free. You have Procreate, I think Photoshop has a free version. There's also an app called Critter as well. And then you just need to follow these 3 steps. First, create a new layer over your reference photo. Second, use the color picker to then grab the right tone so you can block in your prominent value shape. And third, just keep it dead simple. If you start out simple, the rest of your drawing process will be simple. But if you start out complicated, then the rest of your drawing process becomes complicated. Now, if you're old school and you don't really get on with technology, you can just print out the photo and do it that way. Either way, the goal is exactly the same: to see and block in those big prominent tonal shapes. These shapes are the backbone to your portrait. Strip them away and you lose all depth, life and soul in your drawing. This is why I also love using charcoal powder as well, because it guides you to focus on the main tonal shapes, keeps your edges soft and makes blending super simple. You can do this with pencils too, but you don't get quite as much flexibility. Once the pencil is on the paper, it's more difficult to change it around. So if you ever struggled with wonky proportions, overworked shading, or portraits that just don't look like the person, here's the single most important thing you can do starting today. Before you place a single piece of detail, block in your tonal shapes. Use straight lines and don't worry about blending to begin with. Just bold, simple shapes. Because if you master tones, you master realism. So now you know how to map out your tonal shapes so your portraits finally look real. But here's the catch. If you don't have a clear approach, or if you keep slipping into the same old habits, you'll keep hitting the same walls and getting frustrated. If you want to make your process smoother, faster, and way more effective, then watch this video next. These 17 tips will change the way you approach every single portrait.